Hello everyone. Today I will explain the whole Greek mythology. But before we begin, let me know when and where are you watching this from. Now, let's begin. In the beginning, there was nothing the human mind could recognize. No sky, no land, no sea, no time, no light, only chaos. Not chaos as in noise or destruction, but a vast, empty presence, a deep, silent gap where everything and nothing existed at once. From this endless emptiness, the first forces of existence slowly began to awaken, as if the universe itself was taking its first breath. From chaos came Gaia, the earth. She was solid, calm, and endlessly patient. Gaia did not float or vanish like chaos. She stayed. She became the ground beneath all future life, the foundation of everything that would ever exist. Soon after her came Tartarus, a deep and terrible pit far beneath the earth, darker than night and heavier than fear. And then came Eros, the force of desire and attraction, the quiet power that allowed beings to connect, create, and multiply. Without Eros, nothing would grow. Without Eros, the story would end before it even began. Chaos also gave birth to Nyx, the night, and Erebus, the darkness. Together, night and darkness wrapped the early universe in shadow, but even they were not eternal rulers. From their union came Aetha, the bright upper air, and Hemera, the day. Slowly, light began to push back the darkness, and the universe started to take shape. Gaia, the earth, was alone at first. She felt the vast emptiness above her and longed for something to cover and protect her. From her own body, she created Uranus, the sky. Uranus stretched himself over Gaia, surrounding her completely, becoming the heavens filled with stars. Together, earth and sky formed the first great union, and from them came powerful children known as the Titans. The Titans were massive beings, each representing forces of nature and existence. There was Oceanus, the endless river that circled the world; Tethys, the nourishing waters; Hyperion, the light of the sun; Theia, shining and radiant; Mnemosyne, memory itself; Cous, intelligence and inquiry; Crius, the unseen constellations. And then there were the most important of them all, Cronus and Rhea. But Gaia and Uranus did not only create Titans, they also gave birth to the Cyclopes, giant beings with a single eye in the center of their foreheads, masters of fire and metal. And deeper still, they created the Hecaton chairs, terrifying giants with 50 heads and 100 arms, beings of raw, uncontrollable power. Uranus looked upon these children and felt fear. He did not see beauty or strength. He saw threats. So he did something cruel. He forced the Cyclopes and the Hecaton chairs deep into Tartarus, locking them away in eternal darkness. Gaia felt every scream, every struggle. The pain of her imprisoned children cut through her like a wound that would never heal. Anger grew within Gaia, slow and heavy, like a coming earthquake. She decided Uranus would pay for his cruelty. her own body, she formed a great sickle made of hard stone and called upon her Titan sons to rise against their father. One by one, they turned away in fear, all except the youngest and most ambitious among them, Cronus. Cronus was clever, patient, and hungry for power. When night fell and Uranus descended to lie upon Gaia, Cronus struck. With one swift and brutal motion, he used the sickle to overthrow his father, separating sky from earth forever. Uranus cried out in agony, his blood falling upon Gaia and giving rise to new beings, fierce furies, mighty giants, and the gentle Melii, spirits of the ash trees. Uranus, defeated and fading, cursed Cronus with his final breath. He warned him that one day, Cronus too would be overthrown by his own child. Cronus became the ruler of the cosmos. The Titans were free, and a new age began, the Golden Age. Under Cronus's rule, the world knew peace. Humans lived without pain or labor. The earth provided food freely. There was no sickness, no war, and no old age. Time itself seemed slower, kinder. Cronus took his sister Rhea as his queen, and together they ruled from Mount Othrys. But the curse of Uranus lingered like a shadow behind Cronus's throne. Every whisper of prophecy, every cry of a newborn, filled him with fear. He knew what had been foretold, and he refused to let it happen. When Rhea gave birth to their first child, Hestia, Cronus swallowed her whole. Then came Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. One by one, he swallowed them all, locking them alive inside his own body. Rhea wept, helpless, as her children vanished before her eyes. Gaia watched silently, her patience wearing thin once more. By the time Rhea was pregnant again, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. This child would change everything. Gaia came to Rhea in secret and whispered a plan. When the baby was born, Rhea would hide him far away, and Cronus would be deceived. When the child was born, Rhea wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and handed it to Cronus. Blinded by fear, he swallowed it without question. The real child, Zeus, was taken to the island of Crete, hidden in a cave, guarded by warriors who clashed their shields to cover the sound of his cries. As Zeus grew, the world slowly shifted around him. He did not know it yet, but he carried the fate of gods and titans in his hands. Far away, Cronus ruled, unaware that the seed of his downfall was alive, breathing, and growing stronger with each passing day. And as the hidden child of thunder took his first steps in the darkness of the cave, the ancient balance of power began to tremble, quietly preparing for a war that would shake the heavens themselves. Hidden deep within a cave on the island of Crete, the child Zeus grew in silence and shadow. The cave smelled of damp stone and earth, and above it rose steep mountains that protected the secret within. Nymphs cared for him, feeding him milk from the divine goat Amalthea. Every cry Zeus made was drowned out by the loud clash of shields, as armored warriors danced and struck metal against metal. To the world beyond the cave, the sound was nothing more than distant noise. To Cronus, it was nothing at all. Zeus grew quickly, stronger and sharper than any child before him. There was something in his eyes, a quiet awareness, as if he already sensed the weight of destiny resting on his shoulders. As he matured, Gaia herself guided him, teaching him the truth of the universe, the cruelty of his father, and the fate that awaited both gods and titans. When Zeus was ready, Gaia sent him to Medes, the goddess of wisdom and deep thought. Medes was clever, patient, and dangerous in ways that did not involve brute strength. She understood that power alone would not defeat Cronus. It would take intelligence, timing, and deception. Disguised as a humble servant, Zeus entered Cronus's palace. The halls were vast and cold, filled with echoes of authority and fear. Cronus sat upon his throne, still believing himself safe, still unaware that the child he had tried to erase now stood before him. Medes prepared a potion, a powerful mixture that would force Cronus to release what he had swallowed long ago. Zeus offered the drink to his father. Cronus, suspicious yet arrogant, drank it down. At first, nothing happened. Then the pain came. A deep, violent force tore through Cronus's body. One by one, the gods he had swallowed were released. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon alive, unchanged, and filled with rage. The moment was explosive. The air itself seemed to crack as the Olympian gods stood together for the first time. Cronus, shocked and weakened, realized too late that the prophecy had come true. His reign was over, but he would not fall quietly. Thus began the Titanomachy, the great war between the Titans and the Olympian gods. It was not a short war, nor an easy one. It lasted 10 long years, shaking the foundations of the cosmos. Mountains were torn from the earth and hurled like weapons. Seas boiled. The sky burned with endless storms. The Titans, led by Cronus, were ancient and powerful. They knew the world in its rawest form. But the Olympians were younger, faster, and driven by vengeance and hope. Zeus led them with growing confidence, wielding thunder and lightning for the first time. Each strike lit the sky like a burning scar. Yet even Zeus struggled. The war reached a deadlock, neither side able to claim victory. The universe seemed trapped in endless conflict, caught between old order and new. Gaia once again intervened. She reminded Zeus of those still imprisoned in Tartarus, the Cyclopes and the Hecaton chairs. They had been locked away by Uranus and forgotten by Cronus. Zeus descended into the depths of Tartarus, facing darkness thicker than night. There, he freed the imprisoned giants. The Cyclopes were grateful. In return, they forged weapons of immense power. For Zeus, they created the thunderbolt, pure energy shaped into a weapon. For Poseidon, they crafted the trident, capable of shaking the seas. For Hades, they made a helmet of invisibility, allowing him to move unseen even among gods. The Hecaton chairs joined the war as living storms of destruction. With 100 arms each, they hurled mountains upon the Titans, breaking their lines and crushing their defenses. The balance of the war finally shifted. Zeus unleashed his thunderbolts without mercy. The sky roared as if the universe itself had chosen a side. Poseidon split the earth with his trident, flooding battlefields and dragging Titans into the depths. Hades moved unseen, striking fear into the hearts of even the most fearless enemies. One by one, the Titans fell. Cronus fought fiercely, but fate could not be escaped. He was defeated along with his allies and cast into Tartarus. The Hecaton chairs stood guard over the prison, ensuring the Titans would never rise again. The war was over. The universe fell into an uneasy silence, as if recovering from a long scream. Zeus and his siblings stood victorious, but the cost was immense. The world was forever changed. The age of Titans had ended. The age of the Olympian gods had begun. The three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, divided the cosmos among themselves. Zeus took the sky, becoming king of the gods. Poseidon claimed the seas, ruling the oceans and all that moved within them. Hades received the underworld, a dark and silent realm beneath the earth. The Olympian gods made their home on Mount Olympus, a place of shining halls and endless clouds. From there, they would watch over the world, shaping the fate of gods and mortals alike. But peace was fragile. Though the Titans were imprisoned, resentment still lingered beneath the surface. Zeus, now king, carried not only power, but fear, the same fear that had once consumed Cronus. And as new gods were born and new stories began, the question quietly returned, whispering through the halls of Olympus. Would Zeus escape the fate of his father? Or would history repeat itself once more? With the Titans defeated and locked away in Tartarus, a new order settled over the universe. Mount Olympus rose above the clouds, shining and distant, a place where storms rested beneath golden halls, and the air itself felt alive. From this high throne of sky and stone, Zeus ruled as king of the gods. His thunderbolts rested at his side, reminders of the war that had shaped his rise. But ruling was different from fighting. Power was no longer taken by force alone. It had to be held, balanced, and defended. The Olympian gods gathered on Olympus, each carrying their own nature, desires, and flaws. They were not perfect beings of calm wisdom. They were powerful, emotional, and deeply human in spirit, despite their immortality. And it was these emotions that would shape the world as much as thunder or fire. Hera, Zeus's sister and wife, became queen of the gods. She ruled over marriage and family, but her heart was often heavy with jealousy and pride. Zeus loved power and freedom, and his many affairs would plant the seeds of endless conflict. Hera never forgot a betrayal, and her anger moved slowly, patiently, like a storm forming far away. Poseidon ruled the seas, his moods as wild as the oceans themselves. When calm, he granted safe travel and abundant waters. When angered, he shattered coastlines and drowned cities without warning. His trident struck the depths of the earth, causing earthquakes that reminded mortals how small they truly were. Hades ruled the underworld, not as a demon or villain, but as a quiet and unyielding judge. His realm was not a place of punishment alone, but a final destination for all souls. He rarely left his dark kingdom, and when he did, it meant something had gone terribly wrong. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, walked among mortals more than most. She watched crops grow and fields change color with the seasons. To humans, she was life itself. Without her blessing, hunger followed. With her favor, civilizations thrived. Hestia, the eldest, chose peace over power. She tended the hearth, the quiet center of home and family. While others sought glory, she offered warmth and stability. Her presence was subtle, but without her, nothing truly felt safe. Athena emerged fully grown from Zeus's head, armored and fierce, a moment that shocked even the gods. She was wisdom, strategy, and reason, a warrior who valued thought over rage. She would guide heroes and cities, shaping the future not through chaos, but through clever minds. Apollo and Artemis, twins born to the Titaness Leto, represented balance. Apollo was light, music, prophecy, and healing. His voice carried truth, sometimes gentle, sometimes cruel. Artemis was the hunt, the wilderness, and the quiet independence of untouched lands. She protected the young and punished those who crossed her boundaries. Ares embodied war in its rawest form: bloodshed, fury, and destruction. He was powerful, but often disliked, even among the gods. War, after all, brought glory, but also ruin. Aphrodite, born from sea foam, carried beauty and desire wherever she went. Love followed her, but so did jealousy, obsession, and heartbreak. Hermes moved swiftly between worlds, messenger of the gods, guide of souls, and trickster by nature. His laughter echoed through Olympus as often as his clever lies. As the gods settled into their roles, the world below began to fill with humans. Unlike the peaceful golden age under Cronus, this new age was harsher. Humans worked the land, faced sickness, and aged with time. But they also dreamed, built, and remembered. The gods watched them closely, sometimes with affection, sometimes with boredom, sometimes with cruelty. Zeus soon learned that ruling gods was easier than controlling fate. Prophecies haunted him, just as they had haunted his father. One prophecy in particular whispered of Medes, the goddess of wisdom. It foretold that she would bear 2 children, the first a daughter wiser than Zeus, and the second a son destined to overthrow him. Fear returned, familiar and cold. Zeus acted quickly. He swallowed Medes whole, believing he could stop fate itself. But wisdom cannot be destroyed so easily. Medes lived within him, and in time, Athena was born from his mind, fulfilling part of the prophecy and leaving the rest to linger in uncertainty. Meanwhile, on Earth, the gods began to interfere more directly in human lives. They tested mortals, rewarded devotion, and punished arrogance. Temples were built, sacrifices were made, stories spread like fire, turning gods into legends and legends into belief. But not all was peaceful on Olympus. Old grudges resurfaced. Hera's jealousy grew sharper with every betrayal. Poseidon challenged Zeus's authority more than once. Athena and Ares clashed over the meaning of war. The gods were united in power, but divided in spirit. Far below, in the quiet fields watched over by Demeter, a young goddess named Persephone walked among flowers, unaware that her fate would soon shake the balance of life and death itself. And as the earth prepared to feel the weight of loss, the underworld stirred for the first time since the war, waiting for a moment that would change the seasons forever. Persephone was the daughter of Demeter, and she was light made living. Wherever she walked, flowers leaned toward her, and the air seemed warmer. She laughed easily, unaware of shadows or sorrow. Demeter watched her closely, protective and loving. For Persephone was not just her child, but her joy. The earth responded to Demeter's happiness. Crops grew tall, fields bloomed, and humans gave thanks without knowing why the seasons felt so kind. But deep beneath the earth, Hades watched the world from his silent throne. He ruled the underworld with fairness. Yet, loneliness followed him like a constant echo, while the other gods feasted on Olympus and walked freely among mortals. Hades remained in darkness, surrounded only by the souls of the dead. Over time, his gaze turned upward, toward life. When Hades saw Persephone, something changed within him. It was not sudden madness, but a slow, aching desire. He went to Zeus, king of the gods, and asked for permission to take Persephone as his wife. Zeus knew Demeter would never agree, but he also knew the balance of the world required alliances among gods. So Zeus said nothing. His silence became permission. One quiet day, Persephone wandered into a meadow filled with wild flowers. The sky was clear. The world felt safe. As she reached for a single bloom, the ground beneath her cracked open. The earth split apart with a thunderous sound, and from the darkness rose Hades in his chariot of black horses. Before Persephone could scream, she was taken into the depths. The earth closed above her as if nothing had happened. The meadow returned to silence. Only the broken flower remained. Demeter felt the loss instantly, a pain sharper than any blade tore through her heart. She searched endlessly, calling Persephone's name across land and sea. Days passed, then weeks. No answer came. As her grief deepened, the earth began to suffer. Crops withered, fields turned brown. Winter crept across the land, cold and unforgiving. Humans starved. Prayers rose to Olympus, desperate and afraid. Zeus could no longer ignore the damage. He sent Hermes to the underworld to demand Persephone's return. Hades did not refuse outright, but before Persephone could leave, he offered her food, a single pomegranate. Unaware of the consequences, she ate a few seeds. In doing so, she bound herself to the underworld. A compromise was reached. Persephone would spend part of the year with her mother on Earth, and part of the year as queen of the underworld. When Persephone returned to Demeter, the earth bloomed again. Spring and summer were born. When she descended back to Hades, Demeter mourned, and autumn faded into winter. Thus, the seasons were created not by chance, but by love and loss. As the gods watched this cycle unfold, they saw how deeply mortals were tied to divine emotions. The world itself moved with the hearts of the gods. And Zeus, observing the power of grief and balance, began to realize something unsettling. The gods could shape the world, but they could also break it. And as humans multiplied and grew bolder, they would soon test the patience of Olympus itself. The world of mortals grew restless. Cities rose from the dust of the earth, and humans began to build not just homes, but kingdoms. They learned to tame fire, to forge tools, to carve stone into walls and monuments. They tilled the soil, sailed the seas, and hunted the forests. Every achievement, every triumph, was watched closely by the gods. Some gods were pleased. Athena admired cleverness and invention, while Apollo smiled upon art, music, and prophecy. Others were suspicious. Ares grumbled at bravery misused, and Zeus worried when mortal pride grew too bold. Humans, though fragile, were ambitious. They built towering structures, crafted weapons from iron and bronze, and dreamed of immortality. It was this ambition, this desire to reach beyond their place, that caught the attention of the gods in ways both thrilling and dangerous. Among mortals, there were heroes. They were neither perfect nor invincible, yet they carried the spark of something divine. These heroes were shaped by trials, by suffering, and sometimes by divine intervention. One such hero was Perseus, though he would not be born for many generations. Even now, the threads of fate wove quietly, unseen, tying gods and mortals together in ways that would one day erupt into legendary tales. But not all humans were wise. Pride or hubris crept into their hearts. They began to challenge the gods openly. Temples were erected in defiance, not in reverence. Kings claimed powers that belonged to the divine. Mortals forgot or chose to ignore the delicate balance that allowed their world to exist. When arrogance rose, so too did punishment. Zeus watched these growing kingdoms from his throne atop Olympus. He saw kings who sought to rival the gods, who claimed immortality through wealth, conquest, and cunning. to remind mortals of their place, Zeus would send storms, plagues, and sudden death. Sometimes, punishment came directly. Prometheus, a clever Titan who had sided with the Olympians during the Titanomachy, began to grow fond of humans. He taught them arts of fire, of civilization, of craft. Yet even this kindness would provoke the wrath of Zeus, for fire was a sacred gift, meant to belong to the gods alone. Prometheus, clever and defiant, stole fire from Olympus and gave it to humans. He watched as they kindled flames in the night, cooked their food, and forged metal into tools and weapons. He felt a spark of pride, knowing he had altered the balance. But Zeus saw, and his anger was immediate, searing, unstoppable. Prometheus was seized by the storm of divine justice. He was chained to a desolate cliff on the edge of the world, beneath a sky that seemed impossibly vast. Every day, an eagle sent by Zeus himself would descend and tear at Prometheus's liver. Night fell, and the wound regenerated. Each dawn, the eagle returned. Endless pain became Prometheus's companion, a reminder that even cleverness could not escape the judgment of a king of gods. Yet Prometheus's gift had already changed humanity forever. Humans learned to harness fire, to cook, to forge weapons, to light their homes, and to gather together for warmth and protection. Civilization accelerated, even as the gods watched warily. Some gods mourned, knowing the consequences would be great. Others smiled, intrigued by the chaos and creativity that mortals could now produce. And so, the relationship between gods and humans became a careful balance of fear, respect, and admiration. Mortals built cities and monuments to honor the gods, yet they also schemed in the shadows, whispered curses, and dared to question divine will. Meanwhile, Olympus itself was far from tranquil. The gods squabbled, their disputes echoing through the golden halls. Hera's jealousy of Zeus's countless affairs never dimmed. Ares's anger simmered, often flaring in clashes with Athena, whose strategies and intelligence frustrated him endlessly. Aphrodite's influence spread quietly, but powerfully, twisting love and desire into both blessings and curses. Even Hermes, clever and mischievous, sowed minor chaos wherever he moved, reminding all that even the gods could not remain still. But deeper threats were forming beyond Olympus. Old powers, remnants of the Titans, lingered in shadows. Some escaped Tartarus quietly, biding time, whispering promises of revenge and reclamation of their lost dominion. Gaia herself, while largely silent now, observed from her vast presence beneath the earth. She nurtured the seeds of rebellion in subtle ways, remembering the injustices her children had suffered. And then there were the monsters. Not mere beasts, but creatures of legend and terror, born from the union of gods, titans, and primordial forces. The Cyclopes, once imprisoned, forged lightning and storms. But their brethren still roamed hidden corners of the world. The hecatonchires, though loyal to Zeus, could not always be present to stop every uprising of chaos. From these forces, humans learned caution, awe, and sometimes fear that bordered on despair. The first great myths of monsters and heroes began to emerge. Tales of serpents with multiple heads, dragons that guarded treasure, and beasts born of the earth's anger spread through villages and cities. Humans told these stories around fires, crafting lessons wrapped in terror. In every myth, a warning lingered. Respect the balance of the universe, or face consequences beyond imagination. Even the seas were dangerous. Poseidon, restless and moody, stirred storms that toppled ships and reshaped coastlines. Sailors prayed to him for safe passage, offering gifts and prayers in hopes of mercy. Yet his favor could not be bought easily. He demanded respect, obedience, and sometimes fear. The oceans became both a resource and a trap, a realm where humans were reminded of the gods' ultimate power. High above, Olympus remained a place of light and luxury, but the weight of history pressed upon it. Zeus carried the knowledge of prophecy and power. He understood that ruling was more than wielding lightning. It was controlling desire, managing jealousy, and maintaining order among beings whose wills were as fierce as storms. And amid all this, the threads of destiny wove quietly, invisibly, preparing the stage for events that would shake gods and mortals alike. Heroes would rise, villains would plot, and mortals would dare to step into realms meant only for the divine. Cities would fall, wars would erupt, and the echoes of Olympus would resound across the earth. Yet, even in this tension, life flourished. The seasons turned, guided by Demeter's grief and joy. The seas roared and calmed under Poseidon's watchful eye. Mortals learned, built, and dreamed. And the gods, for all their power, could not help but watch with fascination, envy, and sometimes fear. The age of mortals had begun, and with it came stories of love and betrayal, courage and folly, triumph and tragedy. The world itself became a stage for the grandest drama imaginable, a drama that would unfold across generations, touching gods and humans alike, and setting the stage for events far greater than even Zeus himself could imagine. And as the winds of destiny whispered through the trees and across the seas, one question lingered, heavy and inevitable. Who would shape the next chapter of this world, and at what cost? The answer would not be simple, and it would not come quietly. The first heroes were stirring, monsters were moving, and the gods' own flaws would soon create conflicts more intense than any war of titans. The stage was set, and the story of humans and gods, intertwined and inseparable, was only beginning to unfold. The world waited, trembling, for the first spark of chaos that would ignite the legends of tomorrow. The the stories of mortals and gods were no longer separate. They flowed together like rivers joining in a vast, unstoppable current. Cities thrived, kingdoms grew, and humans began to see themselves not merely as servants of the gods, but as beings capable of shaping their own fates. This rising ambition both intrigued and frightened the Olympians. Zeus watched from Olympus, thunderbolt in hand, weighing justice against mercy, knowing that mortals' growing boldness could tip the balance of the cosmos. Among the mortals, one figure began to rise in power and reputation: King Minos of Crete. He was strong, intelligent, and ambitious, yet prideful in ways that mirrored the gods themselves. Minos sought not only to rule men, but to leave his mark upon the world. He demanded respect, tribute, and obedience, believing that the favor of the gods was his by right. Yet the gods, as always, operated on their own terms. Poseidon, displeased by Minos's arrogance, decided to intervene. One day, Poseidon sent a magnificent white bull from the depths of the sea, a creature so beautiful and powerful that it seemed otherworldly. He commanded Minos to sacrifice it in honor of the gods, as a display of devotion and humility. But Minos, intoxicated by pride, could not bring himself to destroy such a perfect beast. He kept the bull for himself, offering a lesser animal instead. The consequences were immediate and terrifying. The god's punishment was subtle, insidious, and cruel. Aphrodite, goddess of love, was asked by Zeus to ensure that Minos's actions would have lasting consequences. She cast a spell upon Pasiphae, Minos's wife, igniting within her an unnatural desire for the bull. The queen, driven by forces she could not resist, conceived a child born from both human and beast. From this unholy union came the Minotaur, a monstrous creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull, its strength unmatched and its instincts untamed. The Minotaur became a living symbol of human arrogance and divine retribution. Minos, horrified yet obsessed with controlling the outcome of his own decisions, built the labyrinth beneath his palace, a maze so complex and endless that even the most skilled could not escape it. Within it, the Minotaur would live, fed periodically with tributes of humans, a dark echo of the gods' judgment upon mortal pride. Far from Crete, the influence of the gods spread through other kingdoms. Entwining mortals lives with divine, while in ways that often seemed cruel or random. Heroes began to emerge, but their journeys were never straightforward. They were tested by gods, by monsters, and by the very consequences of human ambition. One such hero was Heracles, though he was not yet born. Even in the womb, the threads of fate were entwined with the gods' whims. Zeus, who fathered him in a complex union with Alcmene, set into motion events that would shape the world in ways no mortal could predict. Hera, ever jealous, vowed to make his life as difficult as possible. Even before Heracles opened his eyes, he was marked for struggle, for glory, and for tragedy. Meanwhile, mortals continued to explore the limits of human potential. Cities became fortified with walls and towers. Kings waged war not only to expand their territories, but to defy the natural order. When arrogance turned to ambition, the gods responded. Ares, the god of war, found delight in bloodshed and conflict, moving subtly among armies to inflame anger and violence. Yet Athena countered, guiding warriors with strategy, teaching them not only to fight, but to think, to plan, to create victory from wisdom rather than raw force. The balance of divine influence was delicate. Gods acted with pride, jealousy, or affection, often without foresight. Mortals, in turn, were clever, defiant, and unpredictable. This interplay produced the first great sagas, the stories that would echo through time. Prometheus had given humans fire. He had given them the means to build, to create, and to challenge. Yet even fire could be destructive, a dual-edged gift that illuminated the potential for both civilization and ruin. Elsewhere, the boundaries between gods and mortals began to blur in ways both marvelous and dangerous. Mortals prayed, and their prayers sometimes reached the ears of gods who felt amusement, sympathy, or curiosity. Offerings were made, temples built, and festivals celebrated. Yet these acts of devotion were never purely one-sided. The gods intervened, teaching lessons in subtle or devastating ways. Sometimes a blessing carried hidden danger. Sometimes a curse was hidden within a gift. It was during this time that the idea of prophecy grew in importance. Oracles, such as the one at Delphi, became channels of divine will, conveying truths that were often terrifyingly ambiguous. Mortals came from near and far, desperate to understand their fates. Zeus, in his infinite wisdom, allowed these oracles to operate, not merely to warn, but to test both human courage and humility. The first great wars of men and monsters began to take shape. Humans built armies, trained warriors, and fortified cities against threats, both natural and supernatural. Titans who lingered in shadows whispered to mortals, promising knowledge, power, or vengeance. Monsters roamed forests, mountains, and seas, testing bravery and cunning. And through it all, the Olympians watched, sometimes shaping events, sometimes allowing humans to learn through struggle. One such struggle involved the hero Perseus, whose story would later become legendary. Before his birth, his mother Danae was imprisoned by her father, King Acrisius, who feared a prophecy that his grandson would one day kill him. The gods intervened, but not without complexity. Zeus, in the form of golden light, visited Danae, fathering Perseus in secret. Acrisius's attempts to destroy the child failed repeatedly, as divine will protected him, showing once again fate was stronger than mortal control, Perseus's story, like so many others, demonstrated the delicate balance between human courage and divine influence. Monsters would rise, dangers would test him, and the gods' interference would be both a blessing and a curse. Each hero, each mortal, became a thread in the larger tapestry of Greek mythology. A tapestry woven from fire, ambition, sorrow, and triumph. And so, the world grew ever more complex. Olympus shone above, eternal yet filled with internal tension. The seas roared with Poseidon's temper. The underworld waited, silent and inevitable, for souls and events that could not be stopped. Mortals, increasingly bold, began to challenge limits, unknowingly playing into the hands of gods who shaped the universe not merely with power, but with cunning and unpredictability. The stage was now set for the rise of heroes, for the unfolding of epic journeys, for battles that would echo across generations. Monsters would test courage, gods would test loyalty, fate would test wisdom, and amid all this, mortals would begin to understand the weight of their own choices and the terrifying beauty of a world where gods and humans were bound together, inseparable, in a story far larger than either could control. The legends of tomorrow were waiting, hidden in forests, mountains, and seas, ready to be awakened by those brave enough or foolish enough to seek them. The first sparks of these epic tales had ignited, and soon, nothing in the world, neither mortal nor divine, would remain unchanged. The echoes of Olympus whispered through the lands, hinting at struggles, triumphs, and tragedies yet to come. And as the winds carried these whispers across mountains and seas, one undeniable truth lingered. The age of heroes was about to begin, and it would change the world forever. The age of heroes began quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a soft wind stirring before a great storm. Mortals, having learned the ways of fire, agriculture, and craftsmanship, were now stepping into a new era, an era where courage, wit, and ambition could elevate a man above his peers, but where arrogance could destroy him entirely. It was a world alive with potential, danger, and the unseen hand of the gods. And the first heroes were being shaped by struggles, both mortal and divine. Among these early figures was Perseus, though he was still young, unaware of the weight his life would carry. Born to Danae through the golden light of Zeus, he had already survived the cruelty of fate before he drew his first breath. King Acrisius of Argos, fearful of a prophecy that he would be killed by his grandson, had tried to cast Danae and her infant son into the sea in a chest. Yet the gods watched. The chest washed ashore safely, guided by unseen currents, and Perseus grew under the care of the fisherman Dictys, who raised him without knowledge of his divine heritage. From his earliest days, Perseus was clever, courageous, and restless. He was a boy who asked questions too boldly, who explored forests too deeply, who looked at the world not as it was, but as it could be. This curiosity, this spark, made him beloved to some and hated by others, for the gods had a way of rewarding those who dared, but also of testing them in ways humans could hardly anticipate. As Perseus grew, so too did the influence of the gods on the mortal world. Zeus's interventions were subtle yet powerful. He would whisper guidance in dreams, nudge decisions with gentle winds, or create opportunities disguised as coincidences. Athena, wise and ever watchful, observed the boy with interest, recognizing in him a potential for greatness. She would later become his guide, offering counsel and gifts that would prove essential for his destiny. But even as heroes were born, the dangers of the world were growing. Monsters, born of divine punishment or primordial chaos, roamed the lands freely. The Minotaur, already imprisoned in the labyrinth, represented one of the earliest examples of a mortal challenge, interwoven with divine influence. Its existence was a stark reminder that defiance, pride, and sin, even unintentional, carried consequences that could last for generations. Far beyond Crete, other creatures emerged from the hidden corners of the world. The Hydra, a serpentine beast with heads that multiplied when cut, prowled the swamps of Argolles. The Harpies, winged creatures of terror, flew over distant shores, snatching at humans with swiftness and cunning. Even the sea, under Poseidon's restless gaze, was alive with monsters that could destroy ships or drown entire crews in moments. The mortal world had become a place where courage alone could not ensure survival. Wisdom, luck, and divine favor were equally necessary. In these early days, the gods themselves were not entirely united. Zeus, as king of Olympus, wielded ultimate authority, but his siblings and allies were powerful and unpredictable. Hera's jealousy simmered quietly, always waiting to strike those who offended her or threatened her influence. Poseidon's temper could twist the seas into instruments of destruction without warning. Hades, patient and calculating, observed both mortals and gods, sometimes intervening, but often waiting for events to unfold naturally. Athena, Apollo, and Artemis moved among mortals in subtle ways, shaping destinies without revealing themselves fully, leaving humans to wonder whether they were acting of their own free will or according to the gods' designs. Perseus's journey, like that of many heroes to come, was shaped by these divine currents. He would face challenges designed to test courage, intellect, and resilience. His first great task was one that seemed impossible: to slay Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone. Medusa was no ordinary creature. She was a living curse. Her hair, a writhing mass of venomous snakes. Her eyes capable of ending life instantly. Athena, seeing the boy's potential, guided him, offering a reflective shield to see Medusa indirectly, thus avoiding death. Hermes provided a sword, sharp and light, forged to cut through the impossible. The journey to find Medusa was perilous. Perseus traversed unknown lands, crossing deserts and forests where monsters lurked, and the very earth seemed alive with danger. Every step was a lesson in vigilance, every encounter a reminder of mortality. Along the way, he learned to rely not solely on strength, but on observation, patience, and strategy. When finally confronting Medusa, he acted with precision, striking through reflection rather than direct sight, demonstrating that intelligence and courage together could overcome even the most terrifying challenges. Yet even after Medusa was slain, the story was far from over. From her blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, a creature of beauty, speed, and freedom, reminding the world that even tragedy could give rise to wonder. Perseus would later use Medusa's head as a weapon, turning the deadly gaze against foes and shaping the fates of cities and kings. While Perseus faced monsters, other heroes and mortals faced divine tests of another kind. The gods, always curious, often set obstacles not only of brute force, but of morality, loyalty, and wisdom. Humans were asked to navigate choices where right and wrong were not clear, where reward and punishment could be indistinguishable. This was the essence of myth, a reflection of life itself, magnified by divine power, teaching lessons that would echo for centuries. As heroes emerged, the influence of monsters and divine forces created a world simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. Cities thrived, yet fear lingered in the shadows. Families flourished, yet the threat of divine wrath always hovered. Heroes were admired, yet their journeys were fraught with suffering. And through it all, Olympus remained a distant, shining reminder that power existed far beyond mortal understanding, and that even the greatest courage was subject to forces unseen. By the time Perseus returned victorious with Medusa's head, the world had changed in subtle ways. Tales spread quickly, traveling through villages, ports, and forests. Humans began to see that heroes were not merely instruments of fate, but agents capable of shaping destiny. Mortals now had glimpses of what lay beyond their ordinary lives, a world alive with gods, monsters, and the possibility of greatness or ruin. The first sparks of legend had ignited, and these flames would soon spread, consuming fear, ambition, and hope alike. The age of heroes was in full bloom, yet it was only beginning. Greater trials awaited creatures of unimaginable power, wars of terrifying scale, and the inexorable influence of gods whose desires could alter the course of human history in a single moment. And so, the world prepared unknowingly for events that would challenge every hero, every god, and every mortal. The stage was set for epic journeys, for clashes that would echo across time, and for moments that would forever intertwine fate, courage, and the divine. From the shadows, monsters stirred from Olympus, gods watched, and across the mortal world, heroes began to step forward, unaware that their choices would shape not only their lives, but the very fabric of legend itself. The stories were only beginning, and the winds of destiny whispered louder now, carrying with them the promise of triumph and tragedy, love and loss, and a world in which gods and humans would collide in ways both wondrous and terrifying. The Age of Heroes was no longer just a whisper in the winds. It had begun to roar across the lands. Mortals, inspired by stories of divine intervention and the courage of figures like Perseus, started to believe that they could challenge fate itself. Kingdoms grew, cities flourished, and yet with each achievement, the shadow of danger grew longer, stretching across forests, mountains, and seas. Olympus, serene yet volatile, watched all of it with interest, amusement, and sometimes disapproval. It was during this time that the story of Jason and the Argonauts began to take shape, a tale that would intertwine heroism, danger, and divine intrigue. Jason was the son of Aeson, rightful king of Iolcus, though his throne had been usurped by the cruel Peleus. From birth, Jason's life was marked by prophecy and peril. He was hidden away by caretakers, growing strong and clever, knowing little of the destiny that awaited him. Yet the gods, ever watchful, were already guiding the threads of fate. Athena and Hera, both favoring Jason for reasons they themselves understood, began to whisper guidance through dreams, omens, and subtle signs. When Jason came of age, he returned to Iolcus to claim his birthright. Peleus, cunning and paranoid, knew that the boy posed a threat, but devised a task he believed impossible. Jason was to retrieve the Golden Fleece, a symbol of kingship and divine power, from the distant land of Colchis. The fleece was not merely a prize. It was a treasure guarded by danger beyond imagining. It hung in a grove where serpents, fire, and enchantments protected it. A challenge worthy only of the most heroic. Jason did not undertake this quest alone. The gods, in their subtle manipulation, gathered the greatest mortals of the age to join him. Hercules, mighty and unstoppable, whose strength rivaled that of the gods themselves. Orpheus, whose music could charm even stones and beasts. And Atalanta, swift and cunning, unmatched in speed and skill, were among those who answered the call. The ship Argo was constructed, guided by divine hands and mortal craftsmanship, capable of sailing through seas both stormy and calm, carrying its crew toward destinies unknown. The journey itself became a test unlike any before. Storms whipped the seas into frothing chaos, sent by Poseidon in temper and warning, though sometimes diverted by Athena's guidance. Monsters emerged from the depth, sea serpents that could wrap ships in crushing coils. Sirens, whose songs lured sailors to watery graves, and creatures born of both human and divine folly. Every day brought new peril, and every night the heroes huddled together, strategizing, comforting one another, and questioning if fate itself had set them on a path impossible to survive. Yet in the midst of danger, the gods whispered aid. Hermes provided cunning solutions, whispering hints that saved the crew from traps, while Athena's wisdom guided them past impossible choices. Even Aphrodite, subtle and cunning, manipulated hearts and desires, ensuring that the crew's cohesion remained, even when fear or jealousy threatened to tear them apart. And yet Hera's quiet influence, protective but hidden, ensured that Jason was never truly alone. As they neared Colchis, the final challenge awaited. The golden fleece hung guarded by a dragon so immense that its scales reflected sunlight like mirrors, and its breath could melt iron. The task seemed impossible, and yet Jason, guided by divine insight and human courage, approached the grove with careful planning. He used intelligence, patience, and the knowledge imparted by the gods. Medea, daughter of King Aeetes, who possessed the dangerous and mysterious arts of magic, chose to help him. Her knowledge of spells, potions, and enchantments became the key to bypassing the dragon. Though her own intentions remained complex and shrouded in both love and ambition, the retrieval of the Golden Fleece marked not just the triumph of mortal courage, but the delicate balance between gods and humans. Jason succeeded, yet the consequences of divine interference were never far behind. Medea's love, manipulated in part by the gods, would lead to actions that reshaped lives and kingdoms alike. The heroes returned to Iolcus, victorious. But the world they returned to was not the same as the one they had left. The shadow of consequence followed them, a constant reminder that every heroic act bore cost, and that even triumph could seed tragedy. Elsewhere, the ripples of these epic events were shaping other mortal lives. Cities that had been complacent faced threats from both humans and monsters. Kingdoms that had thrived without divine guidance now struggled to understand their place in a universe where gods could intervene at any moment. Mortals were learning lessons that were not merely about courage or strength, but about humility, respect, and the unrelenting weight of choice. The gods themselves, watching from Olympus, began to recognize the limits of even their influence. Zeus, who wielded thunder and lightning, understood that the stories of heroes were teaching mortals to wield power, to act boldly, to challenge fate itself. Hera, ever calculating, realized that loyalty among gods and mortals alike could be fragile. Poseidon, restless and unpredictable, marveled at the audacity of men who navigated the seas and oceans with courage that sometimes equaled the gods. And Hades, quiet in his shadowed realm, observed the undercurrents of ambition and defiance, knowing that the souls of mortals would one day flow through his domain, shaped by their choices and the interference of immortals. Meanwhile, the world of monsters continued to expand, testing not only courage, but cunning. The Hydra, still lurking in distant swamps, grew ever more dangerous, multiplying heads when cut and requiring ingenuity, patience, and divine assistance to confront. Chimera, harpies, and other creatures of myth roamed lands and waters, creating obstacles that demanded not just strength, but the combined effort of heroes, strategy, and insight. Mortals began to understand that survival was not guaranteed by bloodline, by skill, or even by favor alone. It required adaptability, wisdom, and sometimes sheer luck. Through all of this, Olympus remained both awe-inspiring and volatile. The gods' desires, jealousies, and affections were constant, unpredictable forces shaping every mortal and every event. Heroes were rising, yet their destinies were never their own. They were instruments, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly, of divine will. The line between mortal and God was blurred, a dance of power, ambition, and consequence that neither side could fully control. And so the stage for the greatest stories yet to unfold was being set. Wars would rage, monsters would terrorize, and love and betrayal would twist through mortal and divine lives alike. Heroes, both known and yet to be born, would rise to face impossible odds. And above all, Olympus watched, distant yet intimately connected, as the tapestry of myth continued to grow, intricate, dangerous, and magnificent. The whispers of destiny grew louder now, reaching across seas, mountains, and forests, hinting at epic trials, legendary monsters, and heroes whose choices would ripple through time. The world was alive, trembling with potential, and the age of mortals and of heroes was poised on the brink of events so monumental that they would echo across generations, shaping both Earth and Olympus alike. The stories were no longer just tales. They were the very lifeblood of a world where gods and mortals, heroes and monsters, were bound together in a drama, both breathtaking and terrifying. And as the winds carried these whispers across the lands, one truth became clear. The greatest challenges were yet to come, and only those who could endure both divine will and mortal ambition would survive to shape legend itself. The age of heroes had settled into a rhythm of daring journeys, monstrous threats, and divine machinations. Mortals had begun to understand that the world was not governed solely by their strength or intelligence. Fate was a living thing, shaped by gods, monsters, and the choices of mortals themselves. Yet despite the dangers, or perhaps because of them, the tales of heroes spread across the lands, weaving a tapestry of courage, tragedy, and wonder. Among the most compelling of these stories was that of Theseus, the Prince of Athens. From birth, Theseus was marked by prophecy and destiny. His father, Aegeus, feared that the boy might never survive the dangers of the world. Yet, he could not deny the courage and potential inherent in his bloodline. Theseus was raised partly in ignorance of his royal heritage, learning skills of strength, cunning, and combat in the hills and forests surrounding Athens. Even as a youth, he was daring and restless, drawn to challenges that others avoided, driven by a sense of justice and a desire to shape his own fate. When Theseus came of age, he journeyed to Athens to claim his place as prince. Along the way, he faced trials that would test not only his strength, but his intelligence and moral resolve. The roads were not safe. Bandits, monsters, and treacherous terrain awaited him. Each encounter was a lesson, a test, and a preparation for the far greater challenge that would define his legend. The labyrinth of Crete and the Minotaur that resided within it. The Minotaur, monstrous and relentless, had already become a symbol of divine punishment, human arrogance, and the consequences of defiance. For years, Athens had been forced to send tributes, youths and maidens, into the labyrinth, a cruel ritual to satisfy Minos's wrath and the gods' lingering influence. Theseus, determined to end the terror, volunteered to be one of the tributes, understanding that courage alone would not be enough. Wisdom, cunning, and the guidance of the gods would also be required. On his journey, Theseus encountered Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos. Her heart, moved by compassion and fascination, chose to aid him. She gave him a ball of thread, a simple yet brilliant tool, allowing him to navigate the twisting, deceptive passages of the labyrinth. Without it, the maze would have claimed him, as it had claimed countless others. With it, he faced the Minotaur directly. The battle was fierce. The creature's strength was immense, its fury unmatched. But Theseus, blending human courage with intelligence, struck with precision, ending the terror that had haunted Athens for generations. Yet even in victory, the threads of consequence were never far behind. Theseus's triumph over the Minotaur did not erase the influence of the gods. Poseidon's temper, Hera's jealousy, and Athena's guidance continued to shape the world in subtle, unrelenting ways. The labyrinth itself, a creation of ingenuity and divine inspiration, remained a reminder that humans could achieve greatness, but never escape entirely from the reach of powers greater than themselves. While Theseus faced monsters, other heroes embarked on journeys that tested different aspects of courage and morality. Heracles, the son of Zeus, endured trials that would become legendary, the 12 labors. Each labor was not merely a task of strength, but a crucible of endurance, strategy, and the constant interplay of mortal and divine will. From slaying the Nemean lion to capturing the golden hind of Artemis, Heracles faced challenges that pushed him beyond the limits of ordinary men. The gods both aided and hindered him, reflecting their complex, sometimes contradictory natures. The 12 labors were not just feats of strength, they were lessons in humility, perseverance, and the weight of destiny. Heracles' life was marked by tragedy as well as triumph. Hera's jealousy haunted him from birth, and his actions, no matter how heroic, often caused suffering. Yet it was precisely through these trials that he became immortal in legend, a symbol of human potential amplified by divine circumstance. As the heroes rose, so too did the chaos of monsters and divine conflicts. The world became a living stage where courage, wisdom, ambition, and folly intersected. Dragons, serpents, harpies, and other mythical creatures roamed the lands, seas, and skies, creating challenges that required collaboration, cunning, and sometimes sheer luck. Human ingenuity grew in response to these threats. Cities fortified themselves. Armies trained for both mortal and monstrous foes. And civilizations learned that survival depended on both skill and respect for forces beyond understanding. Amid these trials, divine influence remained ever present and unpredictable. Zeus's thunder reminded mortals of power beyond comprehension. Yet, he often allowed them to act freely, observing their choices with a mixture of curiosity, pride, and caution. Hera's interventions, subtle or direct, influenced events in ways that shaped lives without the heroes even realizing it. Athena's guidance, always strategic and calculated, taught mortals that intelligence could rival brute force. Even the smallest interactions, an omen in a dream, a chance encounter, a whispered warning, carried the weight of destiny. It was during this period that the first great alliances and rivalries among heroes began to form. Friendships were forged in the fires of shared struggle. Enmities were born from envy, misjudgment, or the cruel designs of the gods. The heroes' journeys intertwined, creating stories within stories, each echoing the larger themes of courage, consequence, and divine influence. The mortal world, vibrant yet dangerous, became a reflection of Olympus itself. Just as the gods were flawed, passionate, and unpredictable, so too were humans bold, cunning, and flawed. Each choice, each act of bravery or hubris, created ripples that would affect kingdoms, cities, and the balance of power between mortals and immortals. And through it all, the winds of destiny carried whispers of even greater challenges to come. Wars of unimaginable scale, alliances forged and broken, monsters yet unseen, and tests that would stretch the limits of human courage and divine patience awaited. The age of heroes, thrilling and terrifying in equal measure, had reached its height, yet it was far from over. The world trembled with anticipation. Mortals and gods were poised on the brink of events that would define define the very essence of mythology. The stories of heroism, of sacrifice, of love and vengeance were only beginning to intertwine in ways that would echo across generations, shaping not just the fates of men, but the eternal memory of Olympus itself. And as night fell across the lands, stars glittering like scattered sparks of destiny, one truth remained. The greatest trials were yet to come, and the world, mortal and divine alike, was about to be tested beyond anything it had ever known. The age of heroes had reached a crescendo, yet the world continued to turn with a rhythm both beautiful and terrifying. Mortals had grown bolder, cities had expanded, and kingdoms had become intricate networks of ambition, courage, and fear. Heroes walked among men and women, sometimes celebrated as saviors, sometimes feared as instruments of fate. Yet for all the triumphs, the shadow of the gods and monsters stretched across the lands, reminding mortals that power and glory were inseparable from danger and consequence. It was in this era that the tale of Odysseus began to take shape, a story that would become one of the most enduring epics in human memory. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, was a man not of prodigious strength like Heracles, nor of divine birth like Perseus, but of unmatched intellect, cunning, and endurance. His mind was a weapon as powerful as any sword. His patience, a shield stronger than any armor. From an early age, he demonstrated cleverness that rivaled even the gods, a gift that would both save and torment him in equal measure. The seeds of Odysseus's legend were sown in the fires of the Trojan War, a conflict that brought together gods, heroes, and mortals in a struggle of epic scale. The war itself had begun with a single act of divine jealousy. Eris, the goddess of discord, threw a golden apple into a feast of the gods, inscribed with the words, "To the fairest." Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each claimed the prize, and Paris, Prince of Troy, was chosen to judge the contest. His decision to award the apple to Aphrodite in exchange for the love of Helen, Queen of Sparta, set in motion a chain of events that would engulf the mortal world in fire, blood, and betrayal. Odysseus, though not initially seeking glory, was drawn into the war by loyalty and duty. He sailed with the Greeks to Troy, joining a pantheon of heroes whose deeds would echo through eternity. Achilles, swift and fierce, fought with unmatched rage. Ajax, towering and fearless, struck terror into enemies and allies alike. Diomedes, cunning and relentless, challenged both men and gods with equal fervor. And among them, Odysseus wove his own story, relying not on brute force, but on strategy, patience, and cunning that would become legendary. The Trojan War was not merely a conflict of men. It was a battlefield where gods intervened openly. Athena guided warriors, offering insight into enemy movements. Apollo aided the Trojans, with deadly precision. Hera sought to undermine Troy at every turn, while Aphrodite protected Paris and Helen, her favorites in a game that stretched beyond mortal comprehension. Even Zeus, despite his role as king, often watched, manipulating events subtly to maintain balance, ensuring that the war unfolded as both punishment and lesson for humanity. It was during the final years of the war that Odysseus conceived one of the most cunning plans in history: the Trojan horse. The Greeks, unable to breach Troy's walls by force, built a massive wooden horse, hollowed to hide the greatest warriors of their army, leaving the horse as a supposed offering of surrender. They retreated, creating the illusion of defeat. The Trojans, deceived by the gods' subtle influence and their own overconfidence, brought the horse into the city. Night fell, and from within the wooden structure, Greek warriors emerged, opening the gates for the army waiting outside. Troy fell, a city of legends destroyed, and the triumph of cunning over brute force was immortalized in myth. Yet, victory was only the beginning of Odysseus's trials. The journey home, spanning 10 long years, would become a saga of endurance, temptation, and the interplay between mortal will and divine influence. Poseidon, angered by Odysseus's blinding of his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus, stirred storms that tossed ships like toys and sank men in the depths of the sea. Circe, the sorceress, transformed his crew into swine, a test of cunning and restraint. Scylla and Charybdis, monstrous guardians of the narrow straits, claimed lives with terrifying inevitability, forcing Odysseus to navigate with strategy, courage, and divine guidance. Through these trials, Odysseus's mind became his greatest weapon. He spoke with gods and mortals alike, tricked monsters, and endured hardships that would have broken lesser men. Yet the emotional weight of his journey was immense. Homesickness, longing for family, and the constant burden of loss shadowed him. Each choice carried consequence. One wrong decision could cost lives, doom ships, or invoke the wrath of the gods. Mortals around him, even heroes, were at the mercy of forces beyond their understanding. And Odysseus became a living example of the delicate balance between courage and wisdom, mortality and divinity. Meanwhile, Olympus remained both a haven and a stage of drama. Zeus, for all his power, found himself entangled in human affairs through heroes like Odysseus. Hera's jealousy, Athena's guidance, and Poseidon's wrath all intersected to shape events in ways that were unpredictable, yet inevitable. The gods themselves, immortal and flawed, reflected the struggles of mortals in amplified form. Desire, pride, jealousy, and love intertwining in a cosmic web that neither side could fully escape. While Odysseus navigated the perils of the sea, other heroes faced challenges that would test their limits and forge legends. Heracles continued his 12 labors, enduring suffering and triumph in equal measure. Perseus's victories over Medusa and other monsters inspired generations. Theseus ruled Athens, balancing wisdom and strength, yet always aware that divine favor was fleeting and that mortal ambition could invite disaster. Even minor heroes, unknown to history, contributed to the growing tapestry of myth. Their deeds whispered in villages, celebrated in songs, and immortalized in the oral traditions that carried the memory of heroism forward. The world itself seemed to pulse with energy. Mountains, rivers, and seas were not merely landscapes, but living entities influenced by gods and monsters. The earth bore scars of divine conflict and mortal ambition alike. Forests burned, rivers flooded, cities rose and fell. Humans learned not only to survive, but to interpret omens, to read the will of the gods, and to act with courage tempered by wisdom. Civilization advanced, shaped by both mortal ingenuity and divine interference. Each achievement a testament to the complex dance between power and humility. As Odysseus's journey drew near its end, he returned to Ithaca, transformed not only by experience, but by the weight of knowledge, loss, and perseverance. He faced suitors, rivals, and the consequences of years lost. Yet through cunning, courage, and patience, he reclaimed his kingdom. His story, like that of so many heroes, became a lesson in the delicate balance between human agency and divine influence. Triumph was possible, but never without cost. Victory was sweet, yet it carried shadows of loss, longing, and the awareness that even heroes were ultimately bound by forces greater than themselves. The age of heroes, filled with monsters, divine trials, and mortal courage, had reached a zenith. Yet even as these stories concluded, the world remained alive, brimming with potential, danger, and the invisible threads of fate. Olympus watched silently, a reminder that power and wisdom were intertwined, that human ambition could soar, but never fully escape the divine gaze. And so, the stage was set for the final, lasting truth of Greek mythology, that the lives of mortals, the deeds of heroes, and the will of gods were forever intertwined. Every triumph carried consequence. Every choice rippled across kingdoms. And every act of courage or folly contributed to a legacy that would echo across time, immortalized not in monuments, but in the enduring power of story itself. The winds of destiny continued to stir, carrying whispers of adventure, tragedy, love, and vengeance. The echoes of heroes and monsters resounded across mountains, seas, and cities. Olympus glimmered above, eternal and watchful, reminding mortals and gods alike that the world was a stage, and they were bound together in a story far larger than any could comprehend. The age of heroes was over, yet the stories endured, shaping generations, inspiring courage, and teaching that even in a world ruled by divine forces, mortal hearts, minds, and wills could leave an indelible mark upon eternity. The legacy of Greek mythology was complete, yet eternal, a living testament to the intertwined fates of gods and men, and the enduring power of courage, cunning, and the human spirit. Long after the age of great heroes seemed to fade, the world of Greek mythology did not grow quiet. It only grew deeper, heavier, and more reflective. The gods still ruled from Olympus, unchanged by time, while mortals continued to live, suffer, love, and die beneath their gaze. What followed the heroic age was not an ending, but a slow transformation, a shift from loud battles and monster slayings to quieter, darker stories about fate, memory, punishment, and the cost of defying divine order. This was the age when myths became lessons rather than spectacles. Stories were no longer only about strength or cleverness, but about consequences, about what happens after glory fades, about what remains when the songs stop being sung. One of the clearest examples of this shift was the fate of the house of Atreus, a family cursed so deeply that even the gods seemed hesitant to interfere. The curse began generations earlier with acts of betrayal, murder, and cannibalism, and it carried forward like a poison in the blood. Agamemnon, the great king who led the Greek forces at Troy, returned home victorious, only to be murdered by his own wife, Clytemnestra. His death was not sudden chaos, but a slow, calculated act of revenge for the sacrifice of their daughter, Iphigenia. Clytemnestra ruled in his place, hardened by grief and rage, but the curse did not end with her victory. Years later, her son Orestes returned, guided and tormented by Apollo's command to avenge his father. Torn between loyalty and horror, Orestes killed his own mother. The act shattered him. The Furies, ancient spirits of vengeance, older than the Olympian gods, rose from the depths of the world to hunt him. They whispered in his mind, appeared in his dreams, and drove him toward madness. This was not a story of triumph. There were no cheers, no clean victories. Even Apollo's guidance could not protect Orestes from the weight of his actions. In the end, Athena herself intervened, establishing the first trial in human history. Not a battle, but a court. Not violence, but judgment. When the votes were tied, Athena cast the final one, freeing Orestes and transforming the Furies into the Eumenides, gentler spirits of justice rather than pure vengeance. It was a turning point. The myths were changing. Justice replaced endless revenge. Law began to rise where bloodshed once ruled. Humanity was slowly learning to stand between chaos and order, guided, but not controlled by the gods. Elsewhere, quieter tragedies unfolded. The story of Orpheus and Eurydice spread through the lands, carried by poets and musicians. Orpheus, whose music could calm storms and move stones, fell deeply in love with Eurydice. When she died suddenly from a snake bite, his grief shook the world. He descended into the underworld itself, his music softening the hearts of Hades and Persephone. They granted him a single chance to bring her back on one condition. He must not look back at her until they reached the surface. Step by step, he climbed, hearing her footsteps behind him, feeling her presence, but never seeing her. Doubt crept in. Fear whispered. And just before reaching the light, Orpheus turned. In that instant, Eurydice faded back into the shadows, lost forever. It was a story told not to inspire courage, but to warn of impatience, of how even love can fail when trust breaks for a single moment. The gods themselves were not untouched by these changing times. Zeus remained king, but his rule felt heavier, more distant. Hera's jealousy softened into quiet endurance. Athena focused more on wisdom and cities than on war. Even Ares, once glorified in battle, became a symbol of destruction without purpose. The Olympians still held power, but they were no longer reckless. They had seen what unchecked divine emotion could do to the mortal world. Yet punishment still existed. Those who challenged the gods directly paid a terrible price. Niobe, who boasted that she was greater than Leto because she had more children, watched in horror as Apollo and Artemis struck every one of them down. Arachne, who dared to challenge Athena in weaving and exposed the gods' cruelty through her art, was transformed into a spider, not killed, but cursed to weave forever. These were not random acts. They were warnings carved into myth. Below the surface of the world, the underworld grew more defined. Hades ruled with cold fairness. The river Styx bound even gods to their oaths. Souls were judged not by fame, but by balance. Elysium welcomed the just and heroic. The asphodel meadows held the ordinary. Tartarus swallowed the truly damned. Death was no longer chaos, it was structure. Order had reached even the end of life. As generations passed, the gods became stories told more than forces directly seen. Temples replaced direct encounters. Rituals replaced miracles. Humanity began to shape its own identity, inspired by myth, but no longer living inside it completely. Greek mythology became memory, philosophy, and warning all at once. Yet the world was never truly empty of magic. The winds still carried echoes of Hermes, laughter. The sea still reflected Poseidon's moods. Thunder still reminded mortals of Zeus. The gods had not left. They had simply stepped back, allowing humanity to walk forward on its own legs, guided by the lessons carved into legend. And as storytellers gathered around fires and in amphitheaters, they began to realize something powerful. These myths were no longer just stories about gods. They were stories about being human, about pride and loss, love and fear, choice and consequence. The age of action had ended. The age of meaning had begun. And beyond these reflections, beyond justice and tragedy, there remained deeper questions about fate itself, about prophecy, about whether destiny could ever truly be escaped. Questions that would lead into the final and most haunting threads of Greek mythology, where even the gods could not outrun what was written. Those whispers of fate were already moving, and in the next part, they would step fully into the light. Fate had always existed in Greek mythology, but now it moved from the shadows to the center of every story. It was no longer something whispered in passing. It was the silent force that ruled gods and mortals alike, unbreakable, unavoidable, and absolute. Even Zeus, king of Olympus, could not cut its threads, and at the heart of fate stood the Moirai, the three fates, ancient beings older than the Olympians themselves. Clotho spun the thread of life, her fingers endlessly turning raw possibility into existence. Lachesis measured each thread, deciding how long a life would be, how much joy or suffering it would contain. Atropos, silent and final, cut the thread when the moment arrived. No prayer could stop her hand. No power could delay her forever. Gods respected them. Mortals feared them. And every story, no matter how grand, ended where Atropos decided. This truth shaped the final myths of Greece, stories filled with prophecy and dread. One of the most haunting was the tale of Oedipus, a man who tried to escape destiny and instead ran straight into it. Before he was born, a prophecy declared that he would kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, his parents attempted to cheat fate by abandoning him as an infant. But fate does not need witnesses. It only needs time. Oedipus survived, raised by strangers, never knowing his true origin. When he heard the prophecy himself, he fled the people he believed were his parents, thinking distance could break destiny. On the road, he killed a stranger in a moment of rage. Later, he solved the riddle of the Sphinx, saved the city of Thebes, and married its widowed queen. Only much later did the truth surface. The stranger was his father. The queen was his mother. There was no villain in this story, no monster to slay, only fate patiently unfolding exactly as promised. When Oedipus realized the truth, he blinded himself not as punishment, but as acknowledgement. He had seen too much. His suffering became a warning passed down through generations. Destiny cannot be outrun. The harder you fight it, the tighter it closes. The gods themselves lived under this same shadow. Apollo, god of prophecy, could see fate but not change it. Zeus could delay events but never erase them. Even immortality offered no escape from what was written. The gods knew this, and it shaped their behavior. They guided, they manipulated, they warned, but they rarely intervened fully because they knew the outcome was already sealed. This understanding brought a strange sadness to Olympus. Immortal beings, forever young, yet forever trapped in patterns they could not break. Hera would always feel jealousy. Ares would always crave violence. Aphrodite would always spark desire and heartbreak. They were eternal, but not free. Among mortals, prophecy became both blessing and curse. Oracles spoke in riddles, never lying, never telling the whole truth. The Oracle of Delphi, mouthpiece of Apollo, was the most feared and respected voice in Greece. Kings and warriors traveled great distances seeking answers. Yet the answers always carried danger. To know the future was to risk shaping it into something worse. Many learned too late that ignorance could be safer than knowledge. Those who tried to control fate often caused the very disasters they hoped to avoid. And slowly, humans learned restraint. They began to act not as challengers of destiny, but as participants within it. Courage no longer meant defiance. It meant acceptance paired with dignity. As belief evolved, Greek mythology began to turn inward. Stories focused less on divine spectacle and more on moral weight. What does it mean to live well, knowing death is certain? How should power be used if consequences are unavoidable? These were no longer questions for gods alone. They were questions for every human being. The myths became mirrors. Narcissus showed the danger of self-obsession. Icarus warned against reckless ambition. Midas revealed how desire can corrupt even blessings. Each story carried a quiet truth. Suffering was not always punishment. Sometimes it was simply the cost of being human in a world ruled by forces beyond control. And yet, there was comfort in this realization. If fate ruled all, then no one was alone in their struggle. Kings and beggars shared the same end. Heroes and cowards were bound by the same threads. Life gained meaning not from victory, but from how one faced what could not be changed. As centuries passed, temples aged, statues eroded, and belief softened into tradition. But the myths did not die. They transformed into philosophy, into theater, into poetry. They became lessons passed from parent to child, teacher to student, artist to audience. The gods faded from daily life, but fate remained. Silent, patient, eternal, and beyond fate itself, beyond prophecy and inevitability, there remained one final layer of Greek mythology, the legacy it left behind. How these stories shaped human thought, morality, art, and identity long after the gods stopped walking among mortals. That legacy was already forming, and in the next part, it would fully reveal itself when the gods began to step back and fate had revealed its unbreakable grip. Greek mythology did not vanish. Instead, it settled into the foundation of human thought, quietly shaping how people understood the world, themselves, and the unseen forces around them. The stories no longer lived only in temples or rituals. They moved into minds, into words, into art. and into the way people explained love, fear, justice, and suffering. The gods were no longer visitors walking among mortals, but symbols, powerful, familiar, and deeply human. Zeus became more than a thunder-wielding ruler. He became the idea of authority, order, and responsibility. Athena represented wisdom earned through thought, not violence. Apollo embodied balance, reason, and clarity. Even the darker gods, Hades, Ares, and the spirits of the underworld, became reminders that fear and death were not enemies, but unavoidable parts of existence. As Greek cities grew more structured, mythology blended with daily life. Every mountain had a story. Every river carried a name tied to a god or a tragic figure. Storms were no longer random, they were moods. Seasons were not accidents, they were emotions, tied to Demeter's grief and Persephone's return. The world felt alive, meaningful, and deeply personal. Nature itself became a storyteller. Theaters emerged as sacred spaces where myths were retold, not as entertainment alone, but as shared reflection. Tragedies brought audiences face to face with suffering they already knew: loss, pride, betrayal, regret. Comedies reminded them of human foolishness and the gods' own imperfections. These performances were not escapes from reality. They were confrontations with it. Through myth, people learned that even gods made mistakes. That power did not equal wisdom. That beauty did not guarantee happiness. This understanding quietly changed how humans viewed themselves. If even Zeus could be wrong, then failure was not shameful. It was part of existence. If heroes could fall, then ordinary people could still matter. Philosophers began asking deeper questions. Were the gods literal beings, or were they reflections of human nature? Was fate a force, or a metaphor for cause and consequence? Thinkers like Plato and Aristotle did not reject mythology, they reinterpreted it. The myths became tools for understanding ethics, reason, and the structure of reality itself. Greek mythology also traveled. As empires expanded and cultures mixed, the stories spread beyond Greece. The Romans adopted the gods, giving them new names, but keeping their essence. Zeus became Jupiter. Athena became Minerva. Ares became Mars. The myths adapted, proving they were not fragile stories tied to one place, but living ideas capable of survival through change. Even as belief in the gods softened, their influence deepened. Language absorbed them. Planets were named after them. Human traits were defined by them: narcissism, heroism, hubris. Art, sculpture, and literature drew endless inspiration from their forms and stories. The myths became a shared cultural memory, passed down not through faith, but through meaning. What made these myths endure was not their gods, but their honesty. They did not promise perfect endings. They did not reward goodness with certainty. They showed life as it was: beautiful, cruel, confusing, and fleeting. And in doing so, they offered something rare: understanding without illusion. Mortals no longer feared offending the gods daily, but the lessons remained. Pride still led to downfall. Love still carried risk. Power still demanded restraint. Fate still loomed, whether named or not. Greek mythology had become a guidebook for the human condition, written not as rules, but as stories. As centuries passed, new religions rose, new beliefs replaced old rituals, and the names of the gods faded from worship. But they never truly disappeared. They lived on in stories told to children, in books studied by scholars, in art admired by generations who no longer believed, yet still felt something stir when they heard the names. And beneath all of it, one truth remained unchanged. These myths were never only about gods. They were about humans trying to understand their place in a vast, uncertain world, trying to find meaning in suffering, trying to live with dignity under forces beyond control. The gods had retreated into memory, but their stories had become immortal, and as time moved forward, carrying humanity into new ages, one final question lingered in the silence they left behind. If the gods were reflections of humanity, then what did humanity become after the gods were gone? That question would echo into the final chapter of Greek mythology's journey, where myth meets legacy, and stories become timeless truths waiting to be rediscovered. As time moved forward and the ancient gods faded from worship, Greek mythology entered its quietest, yet most powerful phase. The stories no longer lived in temples filled with incense and sacrifice. They lived in memory, in books, in art, and in the way people thought about life itself. The gods were no longer prayed to, but they were never forgotten. Instead, they transformed into something even more enduring. Symbols that spoke across centuries. Civilizations rose on the ruins of older ones, and with each passing age, Greek mythology found new meaning. Scholars studied it not as religion, but as wisdom. Artists painted it not as truth, but as inspiration. Writers returned to it again and again, because no matter how much the world changed, the emotions inside those myths never did. Love still burned, pride still destroyed, fate still ruled in quiet ways. In times of war, people looked to Achilles and Hector and saw courage mixed with tragedy. In times of political power, rulers studied Zeus and learned how authority could become tyranny if not balanced by justice. In times of personal struggle, readers found themselves in Odysseus, lost, exhausted, yet still moving forward. The myths became companions, reminding humanity that struggle was not failure, but proof of being alive. Even the idea of heroism changed. The ancient hero sought glory and remembrance. The later hero sought understanding. Strength gave way to wisdom. Conquest gave way to endurance. Greek mythology adapted to this shift, proving it was never trapped in one era. It evolved alongside humanity, mirroring its growth. Education embraced myth as foundation. Children learned these stories not to worship the gods, but to understand consequence, to see how actions echoed forward, to recognize that even the smallest choice could alter a life. Greek mythology became a moral language, spoken without sermons, taught without commands. The underworld, once feared as a literal destination, became a metaphor for grief, memory, and loss. The fates became symbols of time. The Olympians became reflections of human psychology. Each god represented something within the human mind: desire, reason, fear, hope. Mythology had become internal. The battlefield moved from earth and sky into thought and emotion. As science advanced and reason expanded, Greek mythology did not retreat in defeat. It stood beside progress, offering context rather than conflict. It reminded humanity that logic alone could not explain love, suffering, or meaning. That numbers could measure the stars, but stories gave them purpose. Even in silence, the gods spoke. Their names appeared in constellations, planets, medical terms, and everyday language. Without realizing it, humanity carried Greek mythology into the future, embedding it into culture so deeply that it became invisible. And perhaps that was its greatest triumph. The myths no longer demanded belief. They invited reflection. They did not command obedience. They offered understanding. They became timeless because they asked questions rather than giving answers. As centuries turned into millennia, one final realization emerged. Greek mythology was never meant to last as religion. It was meant to last as story, a shared memory of how humans once tried to explain the world, and in doing so, explained themselves. The gods had stepped away, but their echoes remained in every story told afterward, every hero written, every tragedy performed, every question asked about fate, identity, and purpose. And in that silence left behind by Olympus, something remarkable happened. Humanity no longer needed the gods to speak. The stories had taught them how to speak for themselves. Only one chapter remained, the quiet closing reflection, where myth, memory, and humanity fully merged. Where Greek mythology did not end, but dissolved into something eternal. That final moment waited just ahead, when everything had been told, when every god had spoken, and every hero had fallen silent. Greek mythology reached a place beyond endings. There were no more battles to fight, no monsters left to name, no prophecies waiting to unfold. What remained was something quieter, yet more powerful than any god memory. The world no longer needed Zeus to throw thunder to understand power. It no longer needed Poseidon's rage to fear the sea. It no longer needed Hades to explain death. Humanity had learned these lessons through centuries of stories, suffering, and reflection. The gods had done what they were meant to do. They had taught humans how to see themselves. Greek mythology had never truly been about the heavens. It was about the human condition wrapped in divine imagery, so it could be understood, remembered, and passed on. The gods gave faces to emotions that were too large to name. Hera was jealousy. Athena was wisdom. Ares was violence. Aphrodite was desire. These forces did not disappear when belief faded. They lived on inside every human heart. The myths survived because they were not fragile. They did not depend on temples or priests. They lived in language, in thought, in art. They lived in the way people spoke about pride and downfall, about temptation and restraint, about fate and choice. Every time someone warned against hubris, the shadow of ancient tragedy returned. Every time someone spoke of a heroic journey, the path of Odysseus quietly reappeared. Greek mythology became the hidden structure beneath storytelling itself. Every great tale that followed, whether spoken, written, or imagined, borrowed its bones from these ancient myths. A call to adventure, a test of character, a fall, a transformation, a return. These patterns did not come from nowhere. They were carved by Greek mythology into the foundation of human storytelling. Even the silence of the gods had meaning. It taught humanity responsibility. When the gods were loud, humans blamed them for everything: storms, plagues, suffering. When the gods grew quiet, humans had to look inward. They had to accept that choices mattered. That cruelty was human. That kindness was human. That meaning was something to be created, not granted. The underworld became a metaphor instead of a place. Olympus became an idea instead of a mountain. The fates became time itself, cutting lives without explanation. Greek mythology did not weaken through this transformation. It matured. It became universal. And through it all, one message endured. Life is fragile. Beauty is temporary. Power fades. But stories remain. The Greeks understood this deeply. That is why their myths were not perfect. They were honest. They allowed heroes to fail. They allowed gods to be flawed. They allowed suffering without reward. Because that was real. Greek mythology did not promise salvation. It offered understanding. It said, "You will struggle, you will lose, you will die, but your actions will matter while you are here. Your courage will matter. Your restraint will matter. Your compassion will matter." That is why these myths still breathe, not as religion, but as reflection, not as belief, but as truth told through story. The gods stepped back, but humanity stepped forward, carrying their lessons, carrying their warnings, carrying their beauty. Greek mythology did not fade into darkness. It became light, spread thinly across centuries, quietly guiding thought, art, and identity. And as long as humans continue to question fate, challenge power, fear death, and search for meaning, These ancient stories will never truly end. They will wait, timeless and patient, ready to be heard again.